All right, so we'll continue on shading the rest of our scene. I think the next thing that we can kind of get into is adding some sort of glow to our power stone in our sword that we added previously. And instead of using a material for the stone, I think we can use ourselves of a light instead. It kind of just gives off a better emission. So we'll hop into Cinema and get going with that. All right, so what we're going to do is basically just create a regular redshift area light, but we will have the mesh of our power stone here drive the shape of the light. So we'll hop into our sword guard here. I'll just expand the tube here just so we can see the capsule. So we'll come down to the redshift area light right down here, or you can just click this icon. So I'll create that. That will create this insanely bright light at the center of our scene. But we'll go ahead and take the area light and I'll just drag it into the tube just so we have it put within the same place as the mesh that will be driving it. And I don't currently need the material view, so I'll just hide that. And once we have the area light created, we'll just come into object here. We will change the shape here where it says area shape. We'll change that from rectangle to mesh. And now we need to add whatever mesh we want to drive this light. So naturally, I want this capsule here. So I'll just drag that in. And with that done, we can actually just go ahead and take a look at the render and see what this is doing. So I'll just collapse this view here and I'll start our IPR. And currently, you can kind of see that it's giving off some light here. It's getting really noisy, and that is due to the fact that we have insane amounts of brightness currently because the default intensity for some reason is 100 in Redshift. So I'll change this to around 25. And what we can do next is actually make the light visible. So that's why we kind of get this black dot here, is because the shape of our capsule, which is currently the light, is not visible, only the emission that's giving off it. So we'll need to check this. And that will make our capsule visible, but it's not feeling that glowy currently. And that is because we need to add that effect to our camera, basically. So we'll come down to our camera. I'll just kind of fold down these things that we don't need. Come down to our camera. And what we need to do is add a Redshift camera tag to our camera. So I'll right click, come up to camera tags, and add the Redshift camera. And the reason why this wasn't converted into a Redshift camera to begin with was because we weren't in the Redshift render when we created the camera. But we can easily sort that out by adding a Redshift camera tag to our camera. And that won't do anything currently, but we get all of these fun little menus here that we can do some stuff with. So bokeh basically means that you can add depth of field to your composition. I won't really be needing that since we don't really have much stuff in our foreground or background. But if you want to add that, if you have a scene that is more driven by depth, then this might be really cool to add. You can add some LUTs, you can do color correction in there, you can shift the exposure. So we want to end up at this little menu here called Bloom. So if I override this and hit enable, you'll see what this is doing. So this is basically just a post effect for adding glow and bloom and that kind of stuff. So I'll just kind of shift this down just a bit. I'll keep the light pretty soft. I think I can end up somewhere around like 12 for the threshold and then like 0.3 for the softness. So once we've sorted the glow out, I want to change the color of our area light because I want this to glow any color but white basically. So I'll go into our area light, come down to color here. I'll just expand this so we can see our HSV values. And I think I want this roughly around the same color as our hairband. So like pinkish kind of. So something like this. And once we change the color of the light, that will make the color less bright basically. So white is obviously the brightest color. So if we shift this to pink, that will make it a bit darker. So we'll want to kind of counteract that by adding some more intensity. So I'll change the intensity to 35 or something. Let's try out with some more just to see what this does. I want to have a pretty intense concentrated glow. And then we can also play around with the bloom settings here. As you can tell, if you start to like really crank this down, you'll basically get glow from every single item of your scene that is bright. And we don't really want that. We want it to be just from the sword. And I'll play around with the intensity a bit, and that does some interesting stuff. Maybe I want it at like 1.5 intensity. I'll try and increase the intensity of the light, see what that does. Maybe 45 is decent. I'll increase the color here just a bit. Just if you want to try out any other color, feel free to like just play around here. This is where we kind of get to have some fun. I kind of do like the orange-ish hue as well. Yeah, you know what? I'm gonna stick with the orange, the warm red glow. I think that looks really nice. And once you're happy with this glowing effect, we can move on to the blade of the sword, I think. So I'll just deselect our light here. I'll fold this down and I'll show our material manager again. And I'll go ahead and create a completely blank material for this. So I'll just hit the plus icon here. I'll rename it Blade. And we can go ahead and just reconfigure our window so we see the entire sword when we're working. And I'll go ahead and add this material now to the sword, which is the bool right here. And this kind of depends on what sort of look you're trying to achieve, but Redshift has some really fun material presets that you can use for your blade, for example. In my case, I kind of want to do some form of like illustrative, stylized approach again, so I won't be using them, but I'll just kind of quickly show you how you can add them, and then you can build on top of those if you want. But if I come back here into my blade material here at presets, you can just kind of scrub these through and see what you want to land on. So obviously there's a like aluminum material, there's a gold one, there's, you know, platinum, whatever you want to choose really. And if you want, you can also like rotate the sword around just to see what sort of reflections that you can get. Obviously from the very reflective materials, we will see a lot of the environment once we start to rotate it around. Maybe I want to like have the sword sort of be placed like this, just so we can catch some nice reflection from the lighting and also view it from a very like illustrative angle. So I think I'll settle with it somewhere around there. And as I mentioned, I won't be using any of the material presets. So I'll just hop back to the plastic one, which is the default one for Redshift. And I'll just go ahead and frame all of my nodes up just so we can see what we're doing. So as I mentioned, I wanted to create some form of like colored sword blade, so nothing like metallic. And I want us to sort of do the same kind of effect as we did with the sword guard. So I want to have this color, and I want to add some wear and tear, some scratches, some dusting, and that kind of stuff. So I'll just pause this for now. So since I kind of know what I want to do, it doesn't make sense for me to start to shift around with the color of the diffuse here, since I know that I want to add a bunch of stuff on top of that. So it makes more sense for me to just start out with a color layer immediately. So I'll just search for the color layer, and I'll go ahead and deactivate layer 1 for now. And I'll go ahead and plug my color layer into my diffuse like that. And we can go ahead and start tinkering with the color. And I'll go ahead and start my IPR as well so we can see what we're doing. So I kind of want it to be this bluish kind of illustrated sword kind of thing. So in this case, I kind of want it to be this stylized sort of blade. So I'll just kind of dial in some form of like bright bluish color, something like that. I think we can use that as a base. And as I mentioned before, I sort of want to add this dusting effect that we have on our sword guard as well. So we can do that immediately. So I'll just hit Shift C. The node that we want to search for is called the curvature node. So I'll just go ahead and add that to my layer 1 mask like we did with the guard. So all the bright parts of our curvature will now mask the layer 1 color, but since layer 1 is disabled, we need to enable it. And it's currently black, and I want it to be white like that. And just to see what we're doing, I'll go ahead and connect our curvature node to our output. And here we can kind of see the definitions of our sword, which is really nice. I think this will kind of enhance the shape of our blade a lot. But I want the radius to be a bit bigger, so I'll just go ahead and increase that, see what this does. Since the edges of the sword are so sharp, we won't really get the same effect in the center here as we're getting around the edges here. But I think I'll maybe settle for around like 1 or 0.75, something like that. And we can go ahead and view our material just to see what this does to our color. I think we can maybe increase the radius just a bit. 1.5 maybe. You can go ahead and tweak these input ranges. And I'll actually view the curvature node again, because we want to see what we do. Just kind of try and clamp these things just so I really want these definitions to be visible. So that's why I'm kind of tweaking things around right now. But I don't want these edges to be like as prominent as they are. We can actually increase the amount of samples. That usually helps to smooth out the curvature. So I'll just try and experiment with this a bit. What if I decrease the samples then? Oh yeah, that actually did what I wanted. Maybe we want our sword to be just a bit darker. Yeah, all right. I think we can call ourselves happy right around there. I also want the blade to be a bit more reflective. You can kind of catch a hint of the grass here, but I think we want to kind of boost that up a bit. So if we go into the Redshift material here and go down to reflection, naturally we can't boost the weight to more than 1, so this is kind of capped at this. However, if you want to add more reflection, you can come down to the IOR here, which is basically, that stands for index of refraction or reflection. So in this case, this is set to 1.49, which is kind of like the real world value for a plastic kind of reflection. So if I want to boost this, I can just increase the value here. Now you're kind of getting some form of hint here of the grass. And I know that we will be flipping around the sword and stuff, so obviously this isn't the angle of the sword that we'll be viewing the entire animation. Therefore, I don't want to push this even further, because I know that once we start flipping it around, it might, show a reflection of the window of our HDRI, and then, the bloom might go crazy. So I think I'll settle at somewhere around 2. You can rotate the sword around just to see what kind of reflections it can pick up. I think this amount of reflection is what's gonna look the best, I think. At least once we start adding bump maps and stuff. And I think we also can change the roughness to like 0.1 or 0.2, so it's not completely clear reflected. We had this line visible in the reflection before, and that was the floor behind our camera reflecting. And that's so far away, so that wouldn't really be visible in a reflection. So if we just increase the roughness a bit, it will kind of blur that out, so we don't see that anymore. So that's good. I'll go ahead and pause the IPR for now. As I mentioned before, we want some kind of imperfections and scratches and stuff, some kind of wear and tear on our blade. And naturally, we would use ourselves of a image texture to drive that. And image textures can be a bit hard to come about if you aren't paying for a service, at least the really high-res ones. But luckily, the site that I showed you for the fingerprints, CG Bookcase, has a couple of free scratch materials that I think we can use for this. So I'll add this link to our lesson notes so you can go ahead and download it. Since I want to scale these images up quite a bit, I do want them in 4K as large as possible. And once I'm happy with that, I'll go ahead and download it. It will come as a zip, so you'll have to unpack that. And once you've downloaded it, you'll get all of these different images. All of these images are basically different types of textures that you can drive different parts of your material. So for example, the roughness here is you can drive the roughness of your reflection, basically saying that the dark parts are a bit more clear, the white parts of the image are a bit more smudged out. The height, for example, can be used for the displacement or the bump map in our case. The base color can be used for the diffuse and so on. So these are really, really good to have and are really essential to make a nice looking material. So in our case, we'll be using ourselves of first the height to drive our bump, and then we'll also add some color elements using the AO image that we have here. So I'll hop back into Cinema, and here in the shader graph, we'll go ahead and hit Shift-C. We'll search for texture. We'll add a Redshift texture node. And in the general tab here, we'll go ahead and load an image in. Now, once you've added that in, we do want to plug this into a triplanar node because we don't know if the UV mapping on this blade is good enough. So I'll want to add that in. So I'll search for triplanar like that, and I'll plug it into the texture image X channel here like that. Perfect. And with that in place, we'll go ahead and plug this triplanar node into our output just so we can see what this does on its own. So I'll go ahead and start my IPR, just see how this looks like. And now you're kind of seeing what sort of details will be driving our bump map. So the dark parts of the scratch texture will kind of give the impression that those details are pushed into the surface, and the white parts will be as if they are pushed out of the surface. So let's plug this into a bump map just to see what this looks like. So I'll search for bump map, Shift C to search, like that. Plug this into the bump map, texture input, and we'll plug the bump map into our Redshift material, overall bump input, like that. And we'll plug the material into the output node just to see the entire material. And we'll have a lot of bump going on right now. So we can start off by just decreasing the bump value here. I think 0.1 will be more than enough. So we'll set that at 0.1. And I'll just kind of let this render just to see how it looks like. I think this is the kind of scratching that I'm happy with. And I'll actually just go ahead and decrease the curvature here because it's a bit too harsh. So I'll just reduce the radius a bit so we kind of eliminate these massive bleeding parts around the edges there. So something like that works. And if you want, you can just go ahead and experiment scaling the image. So I'll come down to the UV part of our texture node, scale this up to maybe like 1.5 by 1.5. That's actually giving up some really nice scratches, I think. Maybe somewhere in the middle is the best, 1.25. Yeah, that's looking really nice. Now with that, I kind of want to add some scratching to our color channel as well, because these scratches will only be visible if the blade has something to kind of reflect the imperfections with. So I kind of want to add another layer of detail in the Redshift color layer that we have here. So I'll just go ahead and pause our IPR. And we can go ahead and duplicate this entire selection here. So the Redshift texture node and the triplanar node, I'll just move these down a bit, have them selected, hold Command or Control, and then drag them and then release, and then you get a duplicate of both of them. And the reason why I did that is because we're gonna use the same image, so it makes sense to just kind of replace the texture channel so we don't have to add all of these nodes from scratch. So I'll go ahead and load the AO version of the image texture. So I'll just load that in. And this was just basically a black and white image of the scratches. So if I just take this triplanar node and just plug it into our layer 2 color channel, I'll come into our color layer and I'll activate the layer 2. I'll scroll down even further and I'm going to change the blend mode here from normal to multiply. So multiply is blending mode and basically eliminates all of the bright part of the image and just shows the dark parts. So we want to show the dark parts, which are the scratches. So I'll just activate that. And let's go ahead and preview this, see how this looks. And I think since we have the exact same kind of scaling on our texture node as we have with the bump, the color that we're adding with the scratches are kind of getting hidden by the bump map. So I might try and just scale this one down a bit so we're getting less tiling on this image, just to kind of see what that looks like. So I just set this to 1 by 1. We'll just see how that looks. I'm just going to let this render for a bit. And now we're kind of getting a more interesting result, I reckon. So we're getting some proper imperfections in the surface by adding the bump map, but we also have some imperfections in the color channel that's going to drive another layer of detail. I think we can maybe reduce the strength of this layer. So I'll just maybe set this to 0.5 so it's not as obvious. I'm just going to let this render so we can see what this looks like. Maybe we can add some of it back in actually. So maybe 0.75. I think we can be happy with this. I might want to boost the reflections just a bit though. So I'll head back into our Redshift material, scroll down a bit to our reflection panel and increase the IOR to maybe 2.5. See what that does. And don't forget to rotate the sword around just to see what it looks like in the different angles. As I said, we don't want any like proper hotspots coming in. Maybe something like that. We'll see what this looks like in this angle. I think it's looking really cool, so I think we can call ourselves happy with that. I'll just undo the rotation just so we can bring the sword back to our original position. Now with the sword looking this nice, I think we can move on from it. And the last bit of texturing I'll do in this lesson before we move on to working with the fabric is just to add a material to our little button here that we have around her neck. So I'll just move our render region over there, just to this tiny little area. And I'll just move this over so we have it a bit more concentrated. And I'll pause the IPR for now. And for this one, I'll want to create a completely new material like before. But in this case, I'll actually want to use one of the material presets. But before that, we'll just rename this to the button. We'll go ahead and drag and drop it to our little button here. I'll activate our IPR and I will actually want to use a Let's try a platinum material that kind of gives us this like dark metalish kind of look. And we can actually decrease the reflection a bit, like 0.5 maybe, so it's a bit darker. Increasing the roughness also can help with that. Something like that, maybe even lower reflection. Yeah, all right, that looks nice. And I'll go ahead and frame all of our nodes up. So I'll hit content center nodes like that. And I kind of want to give an effect as if this little button here has been kind of molded with like a finger or something, so it's a bit uneven. And a super easy way of doing that is just to add another noise like we did with our guard here as a bump map, but we will use a completely different noise, the same kind of noise that we used to displace the stones actually. So I'll come into our shader graph, I'll hit Shift C to search for Maxon noise like that. And I'll go ahead and plug this into our output just so we can see what this noise does on its own. I'll change the noise type to Voronoi 1. And I think we really have to scale this down quite a bit just to see what the pattern looks like. But you can kind of see like this little like indents that you're getting on these dark parts. That will basically give the impression of the button getting like pushed in by something. So with that in place, we can go ahead and add a bump map. So I'll just hit Shift C, type in bump and add a bump map. We'll plug our noise into the bump map texture input here, and we'll add that to our redshift material, overall, bump input, and we'll plug the redshift material into our output surface. And now you're kind of seeing the effect that I wanted to create. And you can kind of see this on a bigger scale here in our material preview window as well. I think this is looking really cool. Maybe we can even increase the reflection because I might have toned it down just a bit too much. So I'll just increase it, maybe 0.66. And I think I'll head into the noise again and just maybe increase the scale. Let's try 0.25. Yeah, that's looking really nice, I'd say. And if you want, you can just play with the seed as well in your noise settings. And that's basically just going to randomize. Every single seed is a unique noise formation basically. So if you change this, you will get a completely different result, but using the same kind of scaling attributes and the same noise and stuff. It's just that it's going to randomize the math. But I think I was really happy with it at the original position, which was 1, 2, 3. So I think we can call it a day for this lesson. Let's just turn off the region render just so we can view our design as a full. I'll also just go ahead and scale this down. Hopefully you don't have this tight of a layout because this is not an ideal way of working. But I think we're really getting there. The last kind of cherry on top will be these like fabric textures that we're going to create in the next couple of lessons. Those will really, really bring this into another dimension, I think, because that's when you will really get this stop motion and like tactile feel to it. Can't wait to show you that. And yeah, I'll see you in the next lesson.